Now, during many of my reviews, I like to educate along with telling you which lens is best for you or whether you need it or not. And in this review of the Tamron 15-30, because it is a full frame wide angle lens, I'm going to be talking mostly about wide angle options for full frame cameras, but I'll be talking a little bit about crop sensors as well. And to start with, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what a wide angle lens is. Typically, 24 to 35 millimeter range on a full frame sensor is considered wide. Now, I've got a lot of people that come to me with a crop sensor camera and say, I need a wide angle lens for landscapes. Well, one, you might not. And two, you've already got one with the 18 to 55. As you can see on a crop in that range of 15 to 21, that's considered wide. The 18 fits in there. Now, ultra wide angle lenses, which some of these cover that range as well, are wider. Wider than 15 on a crop, wider than 24 on a full frame. So again, on crop, you've got something like the cheap 10 to 18, incredibly light. Now, none of these lenses I'm going to be talking about are fisheye lenses. Those are the lenses that give you the crazy distortion around the edges of your frame. All of these lenses are rectilinear, which means the lines are pretty much straight. We do get some bending and distortion out at the very edges. What should you do with a wide angle lens? Well, I think, again, as I said, typically people come to me and say, I need a nice wide angle lens for landscapes. I said, hang on to that, because that's not always true. Wide angle lenses can be interesting in some landscapes and specialty shots, but generally to walk up to a nice mountainous scene, mountain scenic, or a sunset beach, and you're going to actually find that a wide angle really just kind of shrinks everything. It exaggerates the distance between the near and the far and can make seemingly gigantic, impressive mountains look not so impressive. But there are some landscape uses. Interiors, confined spaces, good wide-angle lenses are a staple of any realtor photographer because you need to make these little places look big and roomy, and wide-angle lenses do that very nicely. They're also nice for environmental portraits where you really want to include a person and the environment around it. That was one of the favorite uses I had for this Tamron 15-30 and shooting with it in the Seattle and the Pacific Northwest trip that I did. It was very nice to encompass these beautiful landscapes and somebody enjoying them as well. Starry skies, you want that grandeur, the Milky Way, and all of those stars. A nice wide angle lens helps there. And then they can just be kind of fun. They give you a fun effect, a look that isn't really something that we see with our human eyes, but can be enjoyable. Here are the lenses that I reviewed and I'm going to be talking about in this video. Honestly, there aren't huge differences in image quality between. There's some differences in vignetting, but really you can make choices of which lens you're going to buy based on the feature sets that we're going to go over. You don't have to memorize this chart. We're going to come back to it a couple of times through this. But I had the Tamron 15-30 f2.8 VC lens, the Canon 16-35 f4IS, the 17-40, the old but good. I recommend this lens often. We'll see if that holds true after I've put it up carefully against these other ones. And the Sigma 24. Now, you might think that's an odd choice to throw in here, and it is a little bit, but you know what? I've wanted to review this for a while now to see how well it stacks up against the 35 and the 50 from Sigma, so I thought I'd throw it in here. We'll make some brief discussions about it. Technically, it is a wide-angle lens, but it's certainly not as wide as these other ones, and it's not wide if you're putting it on a crop camera like it is mounted right now. I love this focal length on a crop camera. Very nice walk around. Here are the wide angle lenses that are not being reviewed by me right now, but actually I should say I haven't put my hands on them during this review, but that's not going to stop me from talking about them and sharing some thoughts about them. The Rokinon 14mm. When I was doing a wide angle test, I had multiple people write, will the Rokinon be in there? I wasn't able to get my hands on it from Lens Rentals. Canon 11-24. A $3,000 lens. It's a fantastic lens. It is significantly wider than all of these other lenses, and it offers a huge range. Canon 16-35 f2.8, so very similar in range, the exact same range as the 16-35 f4, but it opens up a little bit wider aperture, no IS. And then there's the Tokina 16-28 FX. That's a full frame. Also, all of these lenses are full frame. And f2.8, very affordable price. Let's go through and talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, but to make sure we're all on the same page, mostly we're reviewing here lenses that start at 15 or 16 or 17, right here, these examples. So how much difference does that actually mean in the real world? Each millimeter difference is about 3 degrees in separation, or 3 degrees difference in field of view measured horizontally across the frame. Crop sensors, I mentioned this already, repeat it again. None of these lenses are significantly wider than the 18. Remember, it doesn't matter if it's on a crop sensor or a full frame, the numbers printed on the lens are for your full frame equivalencies. 18 on the crop sensor isn't actually 18, but it is just 3 degrees difference from 15. So yes, wider, but not dramatically so. What do we decide? It's about 9 degrees wider. So a difference that is noticeable, but not jaw-dropping. Here's an example of 15 millimeters. This was taken with a Tamron 15-30. 16 millimeters with a Canon 16, and you can see a little bit of difference. I could go back real quick and forward. A little bit of difference. 17 millimeters, back through each of those. Some differences. Here's another example. 15 millimeters, the front of a little house out in the woods. 16 millimeters, 17 millimeters. So watch this shed over here on the left. 17, 16, 15. Before we get too much further, I want to make sure we're also all on the same page about what depth of field means, because they're really looking here at a lens that offers f2.8, some of them, and f4. That's it. Wide lens is going to mean that you're going to have a deep or a large depth of field. It really doesn't matter what aperture you're shooting at, even at the shallower ones. An f2.8 versus an f4 really means about a foot if your subject is 9 feet away, and then everything beyond that is in focus. It's still very difficult to control or to get any kind of creative blurring of the background with any of these lenses, even at f2.8. They're too wide for that. You can zoom in some, and then you have a little bit more control. So at 30 f2.8, it's going to give you a noticeable difference over 35 at f4, but it's still not huge. However, it can be seen as huge for your exposure. We're talking one full stop of light. That means a faster shutter speed or lower ISO that you can get, so your images are a little bit cleaner. And if we're talking about starry skies again, allows you to avoid those star trails. So that's useful. Here's an example, f2.8 at 21 millimeters shot with a Tamron. Focus was someplace right in this front area, and you can see that pretty much everything is in focus from near ground to foreground. So again, you're not going to be controlling that very much. Here's an example, f2.8 at 15 millimeters of the wood right behind me, angled. You can see the office door, this door here, and it's out of focus, 4 at 16, and all right, so there's a little bit of difference. To talk about video briefly, I just want to keep in mind some people are watching this and need to use these lenses for video. Image stabilization is helpful. It's not going to replace tripod or a good monopod, but if you need to really move and shoot video, IS is almost necessary unless you're using one of those fancy gimbal systems. Filter use is also really nice when shooting video, especially if you're going to be doing any of it outdoors. Variable neutral density filters so that you can shoot at those reasonable shutter speeds for video. And there are some lenses, Tamron 15-30, that does not have a good filter system or an affordable filter system available for it because of its bulbous front end. Keep that in mind. And also, just a general tip, watch out for those edges. You can get really crazy distortion at the edges. So when you're shooting video, you want to make sure that any people in the frame, any important people, non-important ones we don't care about, important ones are near the center of the frame so they look normal. All right, here we go. The Tamron 15-30. It's unique in that it offers an f2.8 with image stabilization or vibration compensation, as Tamron likes to call it. Build quality feels great in the hand. The image quality I've found out of it is quite good. I'd say excellent. It's a very versatile lens because it has f2.8 and it has that image stabilization, and it is the widest of the bunch except for that Canon 11-24 that we'll talk about. Downsides, it is heavy. It's coming in at over 2 pounds, almost 2.5 pounds, and you feel that. When it was in my bag, hiking down the trail, I felt it, especially when you put it on a 5D Mark III, which is already heavy. It was a brick of a combination, and it's not something I want to go out and hike with often. No front filter system at this time. Folks are coming along and making something. This lens hood here is fixed. It does not move. And so the good, it's got a built-in lens hood. The bad, no easy filter system. And even with that lens hood, I found that it's a little prone to flaring. That bulbous front lens, or convex lens if you want to call it that, seems to catch light a little bit more often than you're going to see out of these others. And so there were multiple times where I'd get some more lens flare than I expected, not even shooting into the sun. So f2.8 stabilized, filter size, nope, and heavy, and $1,200. Again, that is a reasonable price for this lens because it gives you f2.8 and image stabilization. Here is an example of filter systems that are coming, and one that you can currently use with the Rokinon, which also has a similar setup with a built-in pedal hood and that bulbous front end. The Canon 16-35 next, which doesn't have a fixed lens hood. This is a much more normal sized and weight and feeling lens. Quality out of it is excellent, versatile, because it is much more travel friendly, great quality, and that image stabilization as well. You're giving up that f2.8, so you're limited at f4, but you're gaining a reasonable filter size and a much more friendly and portable weight, and it's a little bit cheaper than the Tamron. The Canon 17-40, which I said or mentioned that I've been recommending lots for often as a really good value lens. I'm going to continue to do that. It is nice and light. It is very travel friendly. You can see it comes in a little bit smaller than the 16-35. Same filter size. These are both using that 77 millimeters, which is a good filter size, not getting up into the ridiculous expensive 82 range. It even does offer rear filter gels, which is not something we talk about often, and really wasn't talked about until the Canon 11-24 came along, and Canon said there's a rear filter, and people said, you offer rear filter slots for things? And sure enough, there are some existing lenses that have for quite a while, including the 17-40. It's not quite as wide, 17, but on full frame, that's very nice. And you got f4, but you certainly have some vignetting at f4 that I did not see present in the others, and you don't have any image stabilization. You got to keep in mind your uses for these cameras, and I don't want to repeat myself because I'll talk about that again in a minute. The Sigma 24 f1.4, just briefly I'll talk about it. Very wide, f1.4, very sharp, even wide open, just a little bit of vignetting at that. It is a lovely, versatile walk-around prime for both full-frame or crop sensors, but it is heavy for a prime. There's no image stabilization, and you get some. But it's expensive for when you're comparing it against these other lenses, and the fact especially that it's not that wide. On full frame, shooting the starry sky, the Sigma's not a bad option because you can go so wide. Now, one of the first lenses that was not in my review, but it's not going to stop me from talking about it, is the Rokinon 14mm ultra wide angle f2.8. Excellent value. $329 gets you a very wide f2.8 lens that is good optical quality. The downsides: full manual control, manual focusing, manual aperture. Now, actually, for some people that might not be a downside. That might be a benefit. But for some people who want to be able to autofocus in different situations, you can't do that with this lens. It is also still pretty heavy. It's over a pound in weight, and it has that bulbous front end as well, so no filter system unless you're going to buy into that Canon, which I showed, which is the slide-in filters and special attachments. So, and no EXIF information transferred to the camera either. Because there's really no communication to the camera. The Canon 11-24 f4. This is the newest crazy wide angle lens from Canon. Excellent quality, but it's incredibly expensive, very heavy. It is f4 maximum aperture and no image stabilization. Who needs a lens like this? People who are doing really high quality interior or architectural shots. This is a good lens for you, and has the time to set up on a tripod and take the time to do the shots right, because you can get so massively wide with straight lines still and not having any of that fisheye effect. That's a good lens for you. The 16-35 f2.8, so exact same focal range as this, but drop the IS, but add a wider aperture f2.8. It's very good quality as well with that f2.8, gives you a nice maximum aperture. It accepts standard filters. It's a reasonable weight and travel size. but it doesn't have any image stabilization. I would probably pick the 16-35 f4 IS for being a little bit more versatile over the f2.8, but again, it depends on what you are photographing. And the Tokina 16-28 FX, which a lot of people don't spend too much time talking about, but is an excellent value. It is a good quality lens. It is quite heavy, and it has that clutch switch of AF to MF. That is where the whole focus ring pops down to switch to manual focus and pops up to autofocus. All the rest of these lenses I've been talking about are full-time manual focus. The Tokina is not. It is heavy. It also has the bulbous front end so that it does not accept filters, but it gives you a nice focal range and f2.8. My thoughts on the best wide-angle lens out of all of these. Well, I have trouble doing that because it really depends on you as a photographer, but I'll give you some quick thoughts here. General landscape photography, you don't care about those really wide apertures. You're going to be shooting at f4, f5.6, f6.3 to get everything in focus. So things like the Canon 17-40, where all of that vignetting is gone as soon as you step away from f4, or stop down, as I should say. And it's so nice and light and travel friendly. Unless you have somebody carrying your gear, then a lens like this is really appreciated as you're traveling. The 16-35 f4 is fine as well, and it gives you the ability to leave the tripod home in lower light and or shoot video as well. Now, if you're really moving quickly but you need to photograph interiors, I'm really impressed with the Tamron's quality. The fact that it gives you f2.8 and vibration compensation allows you to get some insanely low shutter speeds, wide open apertures, which helps you keep your ISO down, and you can get some nice photos without a tripod. You're doing interiors with tripod, the Tamron still is very nice because you can go to 15, or the Canon at 16. Just that little bit of difference, that 3 degrees extra, can just make a room seem just a little bit bigger, and so that's nice right there. Architecture, the Canon 16-35 f4 is good. The Canon 11-24 is better, but you'll be spending more for it. Video, I mentioned the Canon 16-35 because it has that IS, easily accepts nice filters, so you can put that variable neutral density on, get your regular shutter speeds, and do well. Night skies, f2.8. f4 becomes difficult to get shutter speeds short enough to avoid star trails without going to a really high ISO. So that f2.8 is nice there. It can make the difference between pinpoint stars and stars that are starting to smear or streak across the sky. It's all based on the 500 rule, which is where you take 500 divided by your focal length, and that is your maximum shutter speed that you should be using. And if you're using a crop factor, or if you're using a crop lens, if you're using a crop camera, you need to multiply times your crop factor to figure that out. I got a blog post about that too. I'll put a link to it down below. So my point being, f2.8 really can make a good difference. The Tamron is nice. If you're really looking, though, to be able to do this on a budget, the Rokinon is a fine choice. It takes a little bit more work to get your focus, but honestly, in really low light, like starry situations, you're not going to be using autofocus very often, and the Rokinon is a nice choice. Overall winner. I've been going back and forth. Christina said, well, which one would you keep? If they said you could keep any of these, which one would I keep? The hang-up for me personally is I keep coming back to I do like the option of going to f2.8 for starry skies, but I just personally don't want to carry around this Tamron. It's just too big and too heavy. It's a lovely lens. I had a lot of fun with it, but it's just too big and heavy for me to generally enjoy. So I think I would go with the 16-35 f4 IS from Canon. It gives me that image stabilization, which would allow me to use it in my video applications from time to time handheld. And it's just a nice focal length, and it's a good, easily portable, friendly travel lens, which is something that's becoming more and more important to me. The 17-40 is a great value if you're looking for a decent landscape lens, but I think I'd come back to the 16-35. What about my starry skies? Well, I wouldn't be shooting with that. I have a 24-70 f2.8, and 24 on full frame is quite wide, as indicated at the beginning slide where I said basically wider than 35 is considered wide. 24 is well within that range, even getting closer to ultra wide. Or I would pick up the Rokinon and use that for my wide landscapes and my starry sky shots. This was a discussion of wide-angle lenses. If you appreciated this discussion, if it was useful to you, take a moment and hit that thumbs up button. That's an easy way to thank me for my time. If you're watching this and you're not already a subscriber, take a moment to push that button. The benefit to you is you get notices when I post new videos, new discussions about lenses, tips, tricks, gear reviews, Lightroom videos. All of that is coming. So take a moment and subscribe. And if you'd like to have an in-depth discussion with me about what gear is best for you, well, of course you can leave a comment right down below. I'm happy to give quick answers or sometimes more thoughtful answers if I have time. But really, I want you to value my time, and I'm happy to have in-depth discussions with you about gear if you come over and look at the options on my support page via Patreon. That is where you pledge a reoccurring amount to me each month, and in return you get access to my Lightroom videos. It depends on which level you give at. The support group, where there's not just me, but lots of other intelligent people out there, both answering questions and asking questions and triggering things in your mind that you didn't even know were possible with photography. So take a look at that. There's a link to that right down below, or there should be a link floating up in the corner that you click on as well. And if you've got any questions or comments, just leave those down below. Thanks for watching.